Hello marketer, it's Ty here, bringing you another episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams. Hey, can I ask you some questions? Do you sometimes feel like your developers speak another language, or like they're on a completely different wavelength? Do you fully understand what each of them does? Do you sometimes nod politely while your IT team talks about Frontend, Backend, full stack, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, serverless, cloud, infrastructure as code, environments, and AWS? Heard of DevOps but have no clue what it's all about? Let me ask you another question. Do you think it's beneficial to learn more about technology so you can be a more effective CMO or marketing leader? Look, I know that last question is a little loaded. Obviously, with the rise of MarTech and COVID having thrust all companies into the digital era, I think we no longer have a choice. Maybe pre-COVID and back in the day when IT and marketing were quite separate, we could stay in our lane, play along and leave it to the one technical marketer on our team to translate just what exactly IT we're talking about. Like a tourist, we'd learn a few buzzwords, say them at the right time before we got sprung and quietly, meekly said, "Li parlez anglais?" But now it's like we've moved to another country and we're no longer visiting. We can no longer just get by with English. We have to learn the technology language if we want to build better trust with the locals. So for today's episode, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Hamish Tedeschi, CEO and founder of Mechanical Rock, which is a cloud-native product development company. You have to listen to the episode to hear Hamish translate what that means exactly. And the purpose of today's show is to help you understand more about all those buzzwords you just heard, so you can better understand your dev team and the different roles in it, how to get the best from them, and how to better utilize technology as an enabler to provide a better customer experience or a competitive advantage. This one does get a little technical as you'd expect, so I think you want to grab the notes. As always, just head to growthgenerators.io, look out for this episode and download the notes that include all the definitions and buzzwords and tips from today's show. Written by Dylan on the team. They're usually about 3 to 4 pages, packed full of detail, absolutely free for you and well worth a look. I'll also add that I'm in no way affiliated with Hamish or Mechanical Rock. I just know that he's well respected in the community and I found he has a skill at translating technical information into a language that we understand. And I think he has a perspective and insights you may find valuable. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Lean Mean Marketing Teams with Ty Hayes, where you'll hear from leading CMOs and thought leaders about what it takes to create a high-performance marketing team. This podcast is brought to you by Growth Generators, a consulting firm that helps CMOs design and build modern marketing teams that drive growth. If you need help optimizing your marketing team, head to growthgenerators.io. Now, let's get on to the show.
Welcome, Hamish Tedeschi, founder and CEO of Mechanical Rock, to the Lean Mean Marketing Teams podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And we caught up at a recent event in Perth and I was fascinated by your career. And yeah, really thrilled to have you on the show today. And I thought to kick things off, maybe if you can give us a brief summary of your career to date.
Sure, I'll give it a stab, if you can call it a career. Look, like everyone, I fell into technology. I didn't actually make a conscious choice to go into technology. Shortly after I went to London, I actually went to London to play tennis. 15 years later, I was still there. So my first role in London was actually in banking. And shortly after I started that role, they asked me to build something in Unix or on a Unix system. And I was like, well, what the hell is Unix? I've never heard of it before. Anyway, it was a small little program or shell script to do something. And I actually really enjoyed it. So I went back and I did a postgrad degree in the UK in computing. And shortly after that, I started a technology company later with 3 other guys. And I ran that company for 11 years in the UK before I came back to Perth at the end of 2014. And then I started Mechanical Rock in 2014, 2015 in Perth. So I didn't make a conscious decision to go into technology. I kind of fell into it and I really enjoyed it and really enjoy the people. There's a bunch of really weird people in technology. I'm a bit more of a people person than most technology people.
Yeah, brilliant. And tell us a little bit about Mechanical Rock then before we kick on into the show.
Yeah, so Mechanical Rock is a cloud or cloud-native product development company. Now, what does that mean? We build stuff for people. So anyone, any type of company can come to us and say, hey, I want an application to do this. And we build that for people in the cloud. So we're Amazon partners, we're Google partners. So we build these applications and they basically reside in the cloud, for lack of a better word. And that could be anything. It could be a trading application. It could be a maintenance scheduling application for a mine. It could be a more consumer-facing application or like a Tinder or something like that. But not that we built one of those, but
Yeah, not yet. Awesome.
yeah.
Okay, Hamish, well, fantastic. Thanks for that background. Now, given this show is all about how to design and lead high-performance marketing teams, and in recent weeks we've kind of covered how to do more with less, agile marketing, lean process redesign, all areas I know you have experience in. But today I thought I'd love to tap into that incredible knowledge and experience you've got as a developer and successfully running development teams and companies. And I think it could really help an audience of CMOs and marketing leaders understand a bit more about exactly what developers do, the key roles in the dev team, how CMOs can get the best from their dev team by exploring ways of working like DevOps and Agile. And lastly, how CMOs can think about and leverage technology to provide either a better customer experience or competitive advantage. How does that sound?
That's great. That's good.
Awesome. I'll also flag that to you, I'm probably going to ask a lot of dumb questions, but I just want to kind of really ask those questions that CMOs might be a bit too afraid to ask to help them gain the knowledge they need to really get the best from their development team. So apologies in advance.
Oh, that's all right.
Okay, so let's get started then with the changing role of developers. You've been in the game a while now. Firstly, how would you describe what a developer is or what a developer does, and how has that changed in the past 10 or so years?
Yeah, so when I first got into IT and development, I think what you used to have is large teams of developers all working by themselves, or you used to have large teams of testers working by themselves. And so the developers would build this thing, and then they would throw it over to another team of testers, and they would test this thing, and then they would find problems, and they'd throw it back. And then the developers would develop this thing, and then they throw it back. And it was this constant cycle of back and forth between these big siloed teams. And they never really spoke to each other, mainly through kind of management cycles or tools. They used to talk to each other, so they'd raise a ticket. They wouldn't actually sit near each other. They wouldn't be co-located. And that was my experience. And I didn't really understand it. Actually, my first project in IT was banking application, huge banking application that they were building. And I read this requirements document for 3 months. And I read this thing, and I kind of had this vision of what this software would look like. And I wasn't responsible for building that part of the software. But when I got the software, it looked nothing like, it felt nothing like this document that had been written, which was 300 pages long. And I just couldn't reconcile this document with the system that was built. And not being from a traditional IT background, not doing computer science at university originally, I didn't understand the process. I was like, this is broken. This doesn't work. So that was my first experience of working in large software development teams. And frankly, I couldn't understand how anything got done. And really, it didn't.
And we're going to get into kind of DevOps and Agile a bit later on and really dig into how that's changed to a much better, more efficient way. But drilling down into the difference, say, between a web developer and a software developer, is there a difference these days, and what are those differences?
I think, look, there are differences. I think a software developer is all-encompassing. What we're building is software generally. Let's take the hardware out of it. We're not building hardware for people. It's mainly we're building software. So a software developer is the all-encompassing term for a dev or a developer. Now you could split those into a web developer, and a web developer is basically someone who builds an application that is run through a browser, and that could be any type of application. It could be just a content delivery application. So something like a static web page, which just has information on it. It doesn't actually do anything. It has no functionality other than delivering some information. So I guess you could call a web developer someone just builds an application that runs through a web, but that could be any type of, you could write that in many types of languages. You could actually just write it in HTML and CSS, which is the bare bones of an application.
Yeah, brilliant. And then what about front-end and back-end devs then? What's the difference between those?
Yeah, so a front-end developer would essentially focus on that front-end experience. So something like a user, like you and me using an application, they will build that front end piece, which is essentially these days really JavaScript and HTML and CSS. So essentially, they would be focused around building that part of the experience. A backend developer is generally focused more on the part of the application that you wouldn't see. So authentication is a great example here. So if I want to log into an application, there needs to be a store somewhere behind the scenes that can hold your details and approve or authorize your details and then authenticate that particular user. And that wouldn't be done through a browser. That would be done through a backend system or an API. And generally, backend developers would focus on that area. They wouldn't be the person, the guy or the girl building that particular front-end experience. Now, there's always going to be an element of that. And so that's where your front-end developer and your back-end developer would have to work closely together. And we generally try not to differentiate between a front-end developer and a back-end developer. What we try and do is have vertical slices of functionality and say, well, we're trying to log in. So you might create that login page, but you would also do the authentication piece at the back end as well. So that one developer would be responsible for both the back end and the front end piece of the development. And that's where you hear this term full stack developer. So you're not just the front end developer, you're not just the back end developer, you're kind of full stack. So that's front end and back. And that's really the kind of differentiation there. But I think as the industry progresses, it's more about that holistic piece rather than just saying, well, I'm going to take a small part of the application. It's looking at a bit more holistic approach. And that's the same with people. If I'm hiring a person, I look for more rounded individuals or more T-shaped individuals which have skills in both areas. Frankly, no one's going to know everything. No one's going to be an expert in this area and an expert in that area. But what you want is breadth of knowledge to be able to throw your hand. And the bottom line is that good programming fundamentals can be applied to both front end and back end. There might be some vagaries around the languages or technologies or frameworks that are used.
Yeah. Perfect. And what are some of those most common languages that I use? If CMOs hear these, they have some idea of whether that's a front end or back end language or exactly what that language is for. How can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, it's not black and white in the sense that this is only for front end and this is only for back end. When you hear languages like Java and .NET or C#, they tend to be for more back end focused activities. These days, there's generally a separation between the front end and the back end in terms of code. So you might have the newer frameworks that are used based around JavaScript. So you have things like React or Vue, which are more front-end focused technologies. So they're building web applications, and those are based on JavaScript. So JavaScript is the flavor of choice these days for your front-end application development, and your back-end could be anything. So as long as you send your JSON or whatever you're sending to your back-end in terms of the message that goes to the back-end, it can be any language. So it could be Java, it could be .NET, could be Go, could be Ruby. There's so many out there. And that's one of the things that makes it so confusing in the technology landscape is that there's languages for everything and everyone's inventing a new language every few weeks or a new framework. That's the joke in the IT world is that there's a new JavaScript framework every week. But by far and above at the moment, the most popular one is React. And that's what we tend to use when we're building an application. And there's reasons that you want to go for more popular frameworks. It's that there's people that know that framework. It's well supported in the community. If there are problems, they get fixed quite quickly. And just finding the talent is one of the hardest things. I mean, we've got a customer who they built their application in Ruby and Ruby on Rails. They really find it difficult to recruit and hire people with those skills. So they're trying to move away from that into more accessible skills like JavaScript frameworks like React. Saying that though, we tend to build our applications in a single language. So we will have the front end in TypeScript, which is is a language built on JavaScript. So we can build our React application in JavaScript. We can build the backend using TypeScript as well, using serverless technologies that AWS provides or GCP provides. And then we can also build the infrastructure, because these days you can actually define your infrastructure as code. We can also build that infrastructure in TypeScript as well. So you've got a single language between the front end, the back end, and the infrastructure, which means you can have a single developer or a single team of developers that can do everything. And that reduces that cognitive burden as well. So that's really great. And that's one of the progressive kind of things that's been happening in the industry as well.
And I imagine it makes it more seamless then from dev to production and less kind of bugs and errors as it moves through the cycle? Or
definitely. I don't think that a single language would make that less bugs. But what has changed the game a lot is that now we have infrastructure as code, which essentially means you can define your infrastructure and you say, I want this server or this thing running in the cloud. And if I hit a certain number of users or a certain amount of memory being used, then scale out to have more servers. And then when I hit a number, like a lower number, then I can scale back down. Yeah, and being able to define that infrastructure as code means that each of the environments, your dev environment and your production environment, are absolutely identical. That goes a long way to reducing bugs. So because they are exactly the same, you know that if you've got a problem in dev, you're going to have it in production. But in the bad old days, what we just used to do was have these static servers sitting there, one for dev, one for production. Yep. And we used to chuck shit on them all the time. And you literally would not know what is on them. Yeah. But now these servers are ephemeral, which means we can kill them. We shoot them when we don't need them any longer, and we replace them with a brand new one that has been created programmatically. And so you get these fresh servers, which you know exactly what is on them, and you're not putting stuff on them, like just stacking them up with old bits of code or patches or whatever.
So it's more pure and clean. And that is what AWS allows you to do. And that is, you mentioned serverless in there. Do you want to just explain that or give a definition to what that means?
Yeah. And look, so AWS and Google Cloud and Azure, really that whole public cloud really changed the game from an IT point of view. So back in the bad old days when I was building stuff, don't do that so much these days. What you have to do is provision some physical servers. So you call up your IT provider and you say, look, I think I'm going to have to use about this much capacity. And so you'd order these servers and they come in 18 months. And so you'd wait for this and they'd be millions of dollars because they'd be massive. But it would always be a guess. You'd never know how much to provision. And you could have an application that no one ever uses. And so you spent these millions of dollars for nothing. Or you could have an application that is going to be very labor intensive in terms of the compute, and you didn't get enough. So then you have to order more. And
wait another 18 months.
Exactly, and the experience for users is going to have to be terrible in that meantime because it's always going to be a lot of compute being hit, and it's going to be very intensive. So the response times are obviously going to be terrible for that particular application. When AWS came along, they said, well, you don't need to buy servers anymore. What you can do is just order them, like at the drop of a hat, instantly, and you can shut it off instantly. So you could use it for 10 minutes and only pay for 10 minutes. And not only that, you can set it up in a way that if you hit certain milestones or certain points like CPU usage, you can add more servers and more servers. And so this instantly changed the game for startups because no longer did they have to have $10 million in their back pocket to provision all these servers. It just became an OPEX problem rather than a CapEx problem. That was where all these startups started popping up and creating all these services they wouldn't have been able to do that because it was only the very few that could get funding to actually provision or buy those servers initially. I mean, they still need to pay their staff and they still need to get funding in some shape or form, but it would have been a fraction or pennies on the dollar from what it used to be. And since then, since whenever it was, 2007, AWS has been growing their services. And now they don't just provide servers that you can rent programmatically. What they do is they also provide these services, and one of them is called Serverless. So essentially, you build a function or a thing that can happen, and you stick it up in the cloud, and it just waits there. It waits there until you call it, and you say, do this thing. And when you call it, then you only pay for the time it's actually used. You don't, and that could be microseconds. And the first 1 million times per month that you use that function that's sitting up in the cloud, it's free. So you could have an application that only uses this function half 1,000,000 times, and it's going to be free for you every month. So that changes the game in terms of applications that aren't like 10,000 hits per second. If it's just like you're doing a couple of hits every minute, or you're actually using that function, it changes the whole cost model. And that's where we come in and build serverless applications for our customers. And gone are the days where you're paying $10,000 a month for renting servers. It changes the model to be that they're paying $300 or $400 a month for this application that they use in the enterprise. And we've got enterprise customers where we build an application and it's costing them $300 a month. So now they don't have to worry about the operational costs. And a lot of that heavy lifting goes away as well, because they're not having to patch servers. They're not having to worry about security concerns. They're just focused on the business logic of that particular function and solving that particular problem. And they can spend their money elsewhere. They spend it on development, because development is an expensive activity. It takes time. So that's been the big game changer in terms of public cloud and how that's affected, I guess, speed to market, because now we can go a lot faster. When I mentioned previously this project where I spent 3 months just on the requirements phase before we even got the software, that doesn't happen anymore. People don't wait around for this. People want the value very quickly, and they can get that these days.
Yeah. And it kind of aligns to the whole Eric Ries build, measure, learn loop, doesn't it? Because, customers can build something, see what the demand is like before they invest a bunch in it, and then scale up as they need based on that kind of product market fit.
Yeah, and it's finding out what that bang for the buck is. So what's that thing that the users, who are our customers, really need and want, and that's first.
Yeah.
So doing that one thing, doing it well, and then
building from there. Brilliant. Okay then, fantastic conversation so far. I thought we might then broaden it out, flowing on from that into the structure of a dev team. So say you want to build a completely new website for a client, we might have a hypothetical here. So we've got a new startup, we're just talking about startups, and they want to provide a range of online training courses targeted at corporations. So they want the CEO or the HR director to purchase a license, which gives staff access to some online courses. They need a new website to promote the business and the courses on offer. So what roles do you need on the team to make that happen?
Okay, from what you said, it sounds like it's mainly a content delivery application. So we're delivering courses to customers. However, there also does sound like there's an authentication piece, and it's doing more than just delivering information to a specific set of users. So you don't want people that haven't paid being able to view this information. And also you mentioned payment gateway, these types of things. So to me, it sounds like it is an application. It's doing more than just delivering information. It's not just a website. So I want to build a cross-functional team. And this cross-functional team is where Agile comes in. And that's where you've got a team of collaborative people building some software. And what the idea there is to have a cross-functional team that delivers the software. Cross-functional meaning that they have a diverse set of skills. So initially, I would say you need a product owner. So the product owner is the person who decides what that software is going to look like. They have the power to decide how features should behave. And I actually think that's the most important role on a software development team. Now, I'd probably have a set of developers. And again, if I was hiring, I would make sure they would be cross-functional developers. So they could be both backend and front-end if required. Some may have a specialism in front-end, some may have a specialism in backend, but they should be able to do both. Now, I'd also look for some skills in DevOps. And what DevOps is nothing technical. DevOps is actually an extension of Agile in the sense that it is about flow. And then you talked about kind of lean and Eric Ries, that the flow concept is really about making sure that features can flow at a steady rate. The other concept in DevOps is really about shortening feedback cycles.
Wow, there's been a lot covered in this interview so far. As a marketing leader, we know you like to spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. So we've got you covered. We packaged up all the tips, strategies, and resources from each episode into some beautifully crafted notes just for you. Not ugly AI-generated transcripts, but real notes taken by a real person on our team. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs. Now, back to the show.
If you remember, I spoke about having that 3-month or the development team, which would build something and then
lob it over the wall.
To a testing team, and they would test it. So that concept for me is archaic. What you want is the developers and the product owner working together to understand what those feedback cycles should be, or what that loop should be initially. So how they verify what the outcome is, and working together in real time to be able to reduce that down to hours, days. And so for me, DevOps is not a technical practice, although you use technology or newer technology such as infrastructure as code to achieve some of those outcomes. It's about flow and reducing feedback cycles. So really what the team that I would focus on is a cross-functional team, product owner, maybe 2 or 3 developers. And I would not, me personally, I wouldn't hire a tester on that team. I would push the responsibility for testing onto the developers. If they release crappy software, they should be the ones that feel the pain. They should be the ones that get called up at 3 a.m. to say, this thing isn't working, you've released some crap. Because if they don't have that pain, they're never going to learn. I think having the responsibility for actually quality and making sure it's the whole team's responsibility is a really important fundamental part of a software development team. If you have another team of, say, quality assurance people or testers, where you go, oh, don't worry, if it's not quite right, they'll catch the problem. It absolves responsibility.
And it creates waste, doesn't it? And it just inherently makes so much sense to put that accountability and responsibility on the person building it to maintain it. Stop lobbing it over the fence, work together with the product owner to identify, I guess, the definition of done or what good looks like, and then work together in these short cycles as well, because that's another principle, isn't it? You don't spend the 3 months releasing software in a large batch. You break it down to, well, how quickly can we release the small feature or something in a smaller chunk and test it.
That's actually a key metric. We measure ourselves by how many times per day do we release to production.
Yeah.
And if we're up around 5, 6, 10 times a day, that's a good metric. If we're up around 1 every 2 weeks, that is not a good metric from our point of view.
Yeah, which is still amazing compared to some companies that are still releasing every few months, right? Then, the product owner, really important role. Like you said, doesn't have to be technical, but can be. I think it's still an evolving kind of role, isn't it? And there's some nuances between a product owner and product manager in other companies, and depending on whether you're using Scrum or how you look at it. But that role is really about the customer discovery, isn't it? And the vision for the product and going, what is the right thing that we're going to build based on the right insights, design thinking, and what creates, customer and business value.
Exactly, and you kind of pointed out a gap in my thinking as well, which I think there needs to be some element of UX in that team as well. Because as technologists, we often forget that we're building software for people and we're solving problems for people. And if we don't think about the customer first, if we don't think about that user experience first, then it's very likely that they'll use this software and they'll have a bad experience, or it won't satisfy what they're trying to do. And we've learned that in the sense that we used to build very functional applications, but we've invested heavily in our UX team, and that UX team has made us build applications that actually delight users. You shouldn't underestimate solving a problem for a user in one click, rather than having them to do it in 3 or 4 clicks or a different experience. And that different thinking and different lens is a very important aspect to any team. But it's really hard to, I guess, elicit that or kind of talk about the value of that, especially when you, as a consultancy, when you're building something to someone, they say, well, if we add some more UX into this, it's going to cost X amount. And they fail to see the value until they actually can compare A with B and say, well, if we do this, then we get this result. And I think having that customer front and center of any discussion is the most important thing, because we, as technologists, we often forget that. And we need to have the customer actually embedded with us. And actually in the UK, one of my best experiences was working with Marks & Spencer, which were a big retailer in the UK. And we actually were embedded with the marketing team. And I guess the feedback cycles were very, very quick. So they'd come to us with a problem, we'd solutionize in the sense that we'd come up with a potential solution. And then we push it out to the customer. When I say the actual customer, I mean the people that were using the website to buy software or to buy goods. And then we basically measure and learn and say, well, did that fix anything, or did that solve the problem? If not, and then we could iterate very quickly on that. As a developer, it's probably the most satisfying experience to be able to solve a problem very quickly with the customer in the room, or seeing the customer use the software. Right, the worst thing for any developer is building software that's never used.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is generally my experience with developers.
Yeah, it comes to down to that Agile principle around simplicity is essential, right? And removing things that customers don't want. But it's hard, especially when you've got an in-house team and say you're working on a major website relaunch or something. It can be difficult to do that as an MVP and actually test and learn and build it out phase at a time. Any lessons on how large corporates can do that a bit better rather than do 18 months behind the scenes and then a big reveal?
It happens every single time. Every single customer we generally go to, they say, well, this is what we want. And as a team, we'll challenge them and say, if you only could have one thing from that, what would it be? And it's very hard for customers to actually make that decision, I guess. But when you put dollar signs in front of it, that's when they start crystallizing their thought patterns. You say, well, this is going to cost you $100,000. To have these 5 things will cost you $600,000. Okay, right, we just want this one thing. But this is where the principle around continuous delivery, which is the core tenet of DevOps, it comes in, because what you can do is you can actually build these features and deploy them out to production as you go. So yeah, the first release, which might take 2 weeks, you might get something out to production in 2 weeks. It might be very bare bones, and there might not be much there, but people can start seeing it and actually providing feedback. And that is the key. It's getting something into the hands of the users as soon as possible, even if it's very little there. What you don't want to do is get something into the hands of users after you've been developing it for 4 or 5 months, because the probability is that it's going to be wrong.
Features they're not going to use, it's bloated, and you've just burned 4 or 5 months, right?
Exactly. So yeah, again, look, and it is a cliche, but getting those users involved as soon as possible, and also pushing them to make those decisions. But that's where a strong product owner comes in. And the worst thing a product owner can do is not make a decision. The best thing they can do is, it could be the wrong decision, but make a decision. we're going to go and do A rather than B. Okay, yeah, that's a decision. We've gone. What you don't want to do is interrupt and change that decision, midway through.
Yeah.
Actually, now that you've committed to it, you need to do that.
Yeah.
Major business first.
Yeah. Finish what's in the sprint. So any other differences then between DevOps and Agile? Like I know in traditional Agile, you might have a Scrum Master in there and you work in sprint cycles, things like that. With DevOps, what are some nuances between the two?
I think DevOps is probably an extension of Agile because you can't really have DevOps without Agile. So you need that structure of the team or the cross-functional team with DevOps. But DevOps is more about using technology in a way to enhance the flow and to reduce the feedback cycles. And it's a blend of process, technology, and culture. So to me, it's more like Agile on steroids, and using the newer and great technology that we have, around things like infrastructure as code, continuous delivery, these types of things. Yeah,
testing as code as well, can't you?
Exactly, yeah. And that again, it's one thing that we're pretty key on is configuration as code, it's infrastructure as code, it's test first development. So you're writing your test first before you actually write the application code, and these types of things. You can't have continuous delivery without having feedback. Because if you're delivering crap, and you don't know that you are delivering crap, then that's a huge world of pain. And the only way you're going to know is by having tests, because tests are a type of feedback. Building that into the process and getting that continuous feedback, but also having observability and monitoring and alerting in that process as well.
Yeah.
To understand if things do go wrong, where those things are and how you can fix those.
Yeah, makes sense. And do you couple any of that with like pair programming? Like you mentioned, there might be a couple of devs on the team. Do they work really closely and almost review each other's code as they go? Or?
Absolutely. So we would always have, we do this thing called mob programming, which generally a whole team can do. And it's pair programming on steroids, or we do pair programming, so we pair together. And that's a form of review. 4 eyes, I guess, is better than 2. And you're having that review and that feedback. That is a shortened feedback cycle, right? But apart from that, we're creating pull requests. A pull request is, I've made some changes. I'm going to issue those changes to someone, and they will review those changes. And so they'll go through line by line and have a look at the code, and then they'll say yes, approved or not approved. Or they can write comments on the code to say, I don't understand what you've done here. This might be a better way of doing things. So that pull request can get approved, and then it gets merged back into the main body of code, and that becomes the application. And so when you hear about things like Git is source control on your code, and that's where you can basically create these things called pull requests and review code, manage different versions of code.
Yeah. Amazing. Learning a lot. Thank you, Hamish. Lastly, before we get into the last section around how CMOs can leverage technology better, are there any other considerations that a CMO should think about to get the best from their development team, either the environment or conditions or anything like that? You've obviously led large teams now. You've got a wealth of knowledge on this.
Yeah. Look, I think every developer is slightly different in the way that they can build software. I think one of the things is you need to give development teams space, because it is, and I see that from my role now where I chop and change between different activities at the drop of a hat. Development's not like that. You need to be able to concentrate for large periods of time. So yeah, seeing a developer sitting there with headphones on and concentrating, you need to be able to give them the space, whether it's 2 or 3 hour blocks, to be able to actually program, do their job. And so providing an environment conducive to that is really important. Not having 8 hours of meetings every day. You cannot achieve anything as a developer when you're breaking up your day in meetings. And That's honest. That's just the way it is. That being said, there needs to be time when programmers are working together, so pair programming. There needs to be time when the programmers are understanding and eliciting requirements. So if someone writes down a requirement that I want software to do this, there are always going to be so many nuances in that. So we need to be able to, I guess, have a process for being able to understand what we mean by those specific requirements and break down that behavior so that the developer can actually understand it, because taking it out of someone's head and putting it into another person's head is probably the hardest thing. So having a structured process to be able to do that, and we use a process called example mapping to be able to understand, using examples, what the intended behavior of an application should be like.
Do you couple that with user stories, or how does that relate to a user?
Yeah, so generally you have a user story, and we call a user story a promise of a conversation. So a user story may be written on a card like this. What you do is, when you've got that user story and it's been prioritized into development, then you take 25 minutes as the development team. That's the product owner, the UX person, the front-end developer, the back-end developer, full stack developer. They all get into a room together, and generally you have some users, hopefully, as well. And they use this process to understand, flesh out basically what that user story is and how it behaves in different examples. It's like, well, what happens if my internet drops out? Oh, okay, well, this will happen. This is the message that you get. And you can throw out all these examples, and then the end product is you get a set of testable requirements that you can translate directly into code, which are effectively text, which verify that you've built what you wanted to build.
Yeah. And you've done that in a lightweight fashion through conversation, which is the most powerful method of communication, before you've invested the hours in developing it, right? And then showing something back and they go, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And so fostering that collaboration, I think, is, and how do you do that? Differs by project, differs by, I guess, your environment, differs on the type of problem you're solving. But one thing is constant is that you need to give the right environment. What that environment is, don't know until you're put in that particular context.
Yeah. I think the other, key I've found with this is not switching teams too often. Like, I know it may be hard as an agency if you've got a number of projects, but I think you look at, I think it's Tuckman's, there's forming, storming, norming, performing. Teams need time to build trust together. Learn to work together. And if you keep ripping teams apart, or say, you're on this project for a month and then this one for a month and you keep swapping them around, that can cause problems. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, definitely. Although we as a company do have a kind of policy that we try and, after 6 months on a project, we try and start looking to cycle people off. But if there's a team of 4 or 5, we wouldn't do 2 or 3. We'd look to cycle one person off at a time. And that's just to give a fresh impetus to the team, different lens, and change it up a little bit, because people want to be, especially people that work in the Capital Rock, they want to be challenged onto something new. But I think, if you've got a core team, you provide that environment and that, I guess, that consistency, then that is key. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Well, I'm just reflecting on some of the conversation and thinking it's useful not only for marketing teams to better understand the dev teams and how they work together, but also even just thinking back to the marketing team. Like, how can you embrace some of these principles of DevOps or Agile? And, for me, just thinking about obviously making sure you've got cross-functional teams working together so you don't lob something over the fence and it's not what they expected. And that happens a lot in marketing, even between, say, creative and media, like making sure those teams are working really closely together. Obviously, writers and art and production is all really important, but even like pair programming, like if you've got a bunch of copywriters or creatives together, why not have them almost work together or review each other's work before it goes to market? So I think there's lots of principles even marketing teams can embrace.
Yeah, and making those tasks visible to the entire team.
Yeah.
And so you can see that actually, there's 5 tasks that are stuck in this kind of state. how can we unblock that? How can we reduce the feedback cycle there to actually push these through or move them back to another state? So, the typical Kanban board or whatever, and just making that visible to everyone in the team. I think, these types of things are really valuable. I mean, I do that stuff at home as well, where I have a Kanban board around the task that I need to do and what needs unblocking. So I think, because people can provide answers, if they can see something there in front of them, but otherwise they might not know that these tasks are blocked.
Yeah, that's right. Powerful. Okay, so moving on to the last section before we get to the final fire, which is really switching gears to how CMOs can leverage technology better. So I think there's been a boom in MarTech over the past five or so years. So many products out there now that they can take hold of, and obviously differentiation now is all about the customer experience, not just the products and services that you're offering. So how should CMOs be thinking about leveraging technology to either provide a more seamless experience or create that competitive advantage?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it comes back to the users. So understanding that the customer is I guess, centric here. And when you're a marketing team that and you're working with technology as well, is that the customer is not the marketing team. The customer is actually the person that you're marketing to.
Pays the company money, right?
Exactly. And that's an important differentiation. Right? So how do you bridge that gap between the marketing team, the technology team, and the users of this, or the target? And I think anything you can do to bring those together in a more seamless way is probably going to be a better result for the company. You're going to make more sales. You're going to do better as a company, whether that be softer in terms of your reputation, but also in terms of the cold hard sales, right? Getting things in front of those customers that they want, because at the end of the day, if they want those, they're going to buy them. The best teams are the most cohesive, the most, and they have the less silos between the different areas. And it's easier said than done, but without a doubt, every time I look back on any project or customer that we've worked with where we had direct access to users, then I think it's always a better experience.
Yeah, I think that really embracing that CX and that customer centricity, and even thinking about marketing challenges as customer problems, right? Like, what is the customer problem we're trying to solve, and rather than what's the feature or function we're trying to build, or the campaign we're trying to do, coming back to those user stories. As a user, I want to, so that I can. In terms of the growth of MarTech with cloud computing and the more cost-effective nature of a lot of these platforms now and the scalability of them, you've seen a lot of marketing budgets burgeon with more cash to spend on MarTech, and they need to obviously work closer with IT. But what new skills do they need in a marketing team to either make better purchasing decisions to begin with, and then to make the most from those technology platforms?
Yeah, I think because technology is becoming so fragmented, in the sense that you look at any organization out there and they might have 5 to 10 SaaS applications that are running with all different data sets, and marketing teams might be taking data from Google Analytics or other places there. Having a centralized place to actually store and analyze that data is going to be pretty key. And these days, with the growth also of cloud-based data warehouse technology, I think that's an area that marketing companies or marketing organizations, or even parts of organizations, should be looking at in more detail. Understanding that they can actually make relationships between all these disparate data sets. And actually draw conclusions or run experiments. Talk about DevOps, and the third way of DevOps is where you've got that focus on experimentation and being able to run alpha and beta tests on particular areas or segments and say, well, if we did this, what will happen? And you can only do that with the data. So if you've got that data and you can understand that data, you can make inferences on it. So I think being able to draw all that data together is probably the first step. So there's going to be some level of data engineering in there. And then once you've got that data, being able to make inferences on it, or I guess run experiments on that. And that comes to a level of data science and So we're moving into that area, which I think is probably the growth area.
Oh, there's evidence to back it up. I think you look at a lot of the marketing trends and data analytics and data science have been the skills gaps over the past few years, as well as CX. So they're kind of merging together the importance of this CX and the importance of data to provide a better CX.
And my experience today is that a lot of people talk about data science and machine learning, but they're not really doing it. The actual hard part is getting the data and putting it in one centralized place, and then you can start doing it. So it's a process, right? You've got to actually get the data in, and then make it available, and then you can have a data science team that can really make actual valuable insights.
Yeah. And is that process of setting up a data warehouse, is that a major project?
Look, it used to be, and I think I spoke about procuring some servers previously, taking 18 months, and that was actually for a data warehouse project. And these were the teaser boxes, and they were huge, massive things. And this project ran for 2 years. Ended up being canned after 2 years. It was horrible. So the users never got any value out of it. But these days, we're actually building cloud-based data warehouses in like 6 weeks. We're getting insights in 6 weeks, which to me is amazing. I mean, but to some users, they might be thinking, 6 weeks? What are these guys doing? It's taking so long. But for me, coming from 18 months to 2 years to get insights down to 6 weeks is great. So I guess it depends on your point of view. And I think I can only see it coming down because there's some great connectors. There's great technology out there now which can actually make this stuff a lot easier for teams, a lot more accessible for marketing teams. So you look at technology like Snowflake, which is a cloud-based data warehouse, and then you've got all these connectors through companies like Fivetran. And basically you can just plug into all these SaaS applications. You don't need to be technical. You can do that. And so you can get data into a single place out of all these different sources. And then once you've got that, then you can actually start drawing insights on it.
Yeah, brilliant. On that note then, what is the best way that companies' marketing teams can work with companies like yours? So when do they identify, okay, we don't have the skills in-house, but we need either help with this data warehouse or with developing a product? What's the best way to engage with other companies similar to yours? Where do they start?
We always say start with the end in mind. So what is it that you want to achieve? What's the outcome that you want to achieve? And if you're talking about a data problem, what are the 3 questions that you want to ask or you want to answer? So I've got 3 questions I need to answer, and we will start from there. So you start from those 3 questions, and then you work your way back. And it might be that you actually don't need someone like us or a third party to answer those questions, but it might be that there's some complexity in there that you need some serious engineering to answer those particular questions. So I would always start with the outcome. The worst thing for us is when a customer says, well, just give us a developer. We'll figure it out, and we will never engage with someone like that because frankly, we don't want to just provide a person to do something vague. We want to deliver an outcome, and then we want to back out, and we want the phone to ring in about 6 months and say, hey, remember that outcome that you delivered for us? That was great. Let's do that again on something else. I would always start with the end in mind, work back from there, and then we can shape that solution for you. But the bottom line is my experience is people just want the outcome. They don't give a shit about the solution. Sorry to use language like that, but frankly, they don't care. They just want the outcome, and they want the outcome for as good a price as they can get.
Yeah, makes sense. And one more thorny question before I let you off the hook and get to the Fast Five. But, what does all this mean for companies that have been around a long time? They've got a lot of legacy systems, technical debt, and maybe dev teams that are more familiar with other ways of working or old languages. How do they maintain the systems they've got while rapidly catch up? And, obviously COVID has thrust them into the age of digital transformation and needing to modernize what they're doing. But how do they come up to speed fast?
Yeah, well, that tends to be where we come to play, is that organizations will buy that capability. They'll say, we need that skills uplift, we need speed to market, and they have this 2-tier economy where they need to keep the lights on their old stuff, but they actually need to compete because there's all these startups coming in their market and they're taking market share. So frankly, that's great for us because we can upskill a team along the way. We can build something new. We can show the existing team how to build this new thing, and we can impart knowledge along the way. But we can also deliver the outcome, and that's our business model. So that's the big sell right from us. But frankly, it's not about us. It's about making sure that company becomes a sustainable entity. And if there's nothing you can do to that legacy application, I guess you can isolate that as best you can, but focus on those areas where you can get speed to market. And it might be that you might have SAP installation. It's a slow-moving beast. It doesn't need to be fast, but the fast bits need to be that customer-facing side. So it's having that understanding that where the demand is, that's where you focus your effort. It's not about that legacy piece. I mean, the legacy might be a really valuable piece of software, and it makes the company a lot of money. So we tend to call them heritage applications rather than legacy applications. So they have the
different connotation with that.
Yeah, exactly. So and so you might want to focus on refactoring or replatforming that heritage application into the cloud so you can move faster. But that's going to be there's an understanding that that's a significant spend. So there has to be a lot of value in that application. You have to be making money for the business or saving the business a lot of money. So I guess there's that inflection point of, how much is it going to cost and what's the value to the business? And look, we help companies kind of make those decisions as well. You can come up with a quote to say, well, it's going to cost you this much. And they'll be like, well, thank you very much. We'll just leave that over here and we'll focus on the newer bits so we can do it in a much more cost-effective way using technologies like Serverless.
Yeah. So investment helps you make those trade-offs. Money talks.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Hamish. It is now time for our Fast Five. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
So what do you believe are 3 essential capabilities or criteria of a high-performing team?
Ooh, okay. That's an interesting one. I would say communication is key. Learning is key. So being able to learn new things, and fun. All the best projects I've ever worked on, or the best teams, always have an element of fun. So if you can't have that, then I don't think it's a great place.
Yeah. Spend too long at work not to have fun, don't we?
Exactly.
And how would you describe your team's culture in one word?
I would say experimentation.
Yeah, like it. What's one metric you've used to track and measure team performance?
I think I mentioned this previously, and it is how many times a day we deliver to production. So that's a key one for us, being a DevOps consultancy.
Yeah, makes sense. And what's one skill or capability you've learned recently that you wish you'd developed much sooner in your career?
I would say it's probably a greater level of empathy, and that's being a parent. I have 2 girls, and just seeing what life is like through their eyes has opened my eyes. So, and as a young white male, I probably didn't appreciate challenges people have in the right way. So that's a skill I've learned more recently than others.
Yeah, a critical one. And what book or books have you read that you found yourself recommending to others, or you think our audience may gain value from?
Well, we're talking about DevOps, and I always recommend The Phoenix Project by Gene Kim, and he has also written The Unicorn Project as well. Amazing book. He's the godfather of DevOps, and if you want to learn about DevOps in a non-technical way, then I definitely recommend reading The Phoenix Project and The Unicorn Project. And I personally have been on both of those projects. So,
awesome.
Have a read.
Great. I'll put them in the show notes for all the listeners. And where can people go to get in touch with yourself or learn more about Mechanical Rock?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, generally trolling people, so they can either poke me on LinkedIn or they can go to mechanicalrock.io.
Yeah, Fantastic. Well, Hamish, thanks so much for coming on. It was so good to have a Perth local and to, break down some of this mysterious technical developer world and put it into a language that we understand. I think the audience would have learned a lot around dev teams, the makeup of dev teams, difference between, front end, back end, full stack, DevOps, Agile, and how to get the most from their dev teams and how to think about and leverage technology better. So I think it's dispensed an incredible amount of value to the audience. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's good fun.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Lean Mean Marketing Teams, brought to you by Growth Generators. To say thanks, we've packaged up all those tips, strategies and resources into some beautifully crafted notes just for you, so you can spend more time taking action and less time taking notes. To grab the notes, head on over to growthgenerators.io, look out for this podcast episode and download the notes. But be quick, they're only live for a few weeks after the episode airs.